It's 7 o'clock on a Sunday night, and you know what that means. It's Topical starts right now. A very good evening to you, South Africa, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical. Our digital audience with us tonight, looking forward to getting their take on our main topic tonight. But as you know, the news comes first on this channel. Breaking news on our watch: 6 people have been killed in a bus crash on the N2 near Mandeni on the KwaZulu-Natal north coast. An IPSS medical rescue team at the scene says the 82-seater bus crashed down an embankment and that there are multiple injuries. Provincial traffic officials say some passengers are still trapped inside the bus. SABC news reporter Jade Paul says live rush at the crash scene. She joins us now live. Jade, what more are we learning at this hour?
Well, a very good evening to you, Blaine, and to our viewers back at home. And initial reports had said that it was an 82-seater bus. We are now confirming it was, in fact, an 88-seater bus, Blaine. 80 of those occupants on the bus have been injured, 8 fatalities. What we also know is one of those fatalities is a minor. To speak to us more about this horrific accident, I am joined by Phumlani Vezi from IPSS. Phumlani, thank you so much for joining us on SABC News. If you could just talk to us about the crash accident, and also I'm seeing that medical personnel are still attending to those that are trapped inside the bus and also that are being retrieved.
Thank you, Jessie. What happened this afternoon, early this afternoon around 1600 hours, the bus was traveling from Richards Bay towards Stenger. People were coming from church. Apparently what I heard from the scene, they had a tire blower, and after the tire blown, and it started to lose control, and it went down the bank. At the moment I can confirm we got 8 deceased, which including 1 minor, 7 females, and 1 male, and 80 injuries that I can confirm so far.
You speak about 80 injuries. That is a very large number, Phumlani. Can you just talk to us about, do their injuries range from mild to moderate, or are they fatal?
Out of that 80, most of them are serious. I can confirm they serious. They injured very badly, and some of them they're ranging from minor injuries to serious injuries.
That minor that you speak of that died in the crash, do you know the estimation of the child's age?
Yes, we estimated about 4 years. I think he's 4 years old.
I'll let you go. I know you're very busy on the scene here. Blaine, look, it is very chaotic. We're still seeing some of those church members absolutely baffled, absolutely confused as to how this accident happened. Some of them were actually trailing the bus. As we know, the bus was coming from Richards Bay. It was attending a church service. Many of those on the bus were family members and children, and they were making their way back home to Stanger. Some of the family members that have started arriving here are just trying to get details and information about their loved ones. Medical personnel are on the scene, SAPs are on the scene. The N2 is completely closed, both sides. So for anyone that wants to travel, just know that the road is closed, just to allow medical personnel and law enforcement officers, as well as any other to assist here on the ground, Blaine. As I said, it's very chaotic. We're going to try. I can't speak to some of those family members. I did try before we did a crossing. Some of them are completely devastated, really trying to find their loved ones. I just want my camera colleague to walk with me just to show you the detailing of how many people have come out in their numbers. We've got the health is on the ground. We've got IPSS. We've got emergency services, different ambulances from all over Durban pulling They're rallying together to assist those that are affected. As we know, as Pumlani said, we've still got several people that are trapped underneath the bus and they're trying to get to those affected people. 80 people injured on the ground, 8 fatalities, as Pumlani says, 7 adults and 1 child.
So, way too early in terms of investigation to conclusively say what the exact cause of this crash is. But give us a 360 in terms of what you're seeing, what you're witnessing. Describe the weather for us, describe the scene around you.
Well, Blaine, look, we've had some inclement weather over the course of last week and into this week of the weekend. This weekend, particularly, we've had beautiful weather. The visuals that you are seeing right now is the wreckage. That is where the bus veered off the N2, and it's literally lying in a ditch in a valley surrounded by a very thick vegetation, and that is what's hindering the emergency services and medical personnel to try and retrieve some of those occupants who are affected. I'm seeing, you know, the medical personnel covering a body array. If you can just try and not pan into that. And it just shows that we'll possibly see the number increasing, Blaine. It is a developing story here. There is a lot of confusion on the ground. Many people trying to pull together. They're still pulling people out of the wreckage. We've got family members. We've got churchgoers who are trailing the bus from behind. Like I said earlier on, we've tried speaking to some, but they don't want to speak just yet. They want to see if their loved ones have survived this horrific ordeal.
Our eyes and ears on the ground. Jade Polser there at the crash site on the N2 near Mandeni on the KwaZulu-Natal north coast. In terms of the exact cause, details still sketchy, right? But what we do know, and breaking on our watch, 8 people now confirmed dead, among them a minor. Jade will update us shortly. Jade, you have our number. Any further developments, get on the phone, get to us. We'll put you on the air, get the viewers the very latest. Thank you very much indeed. Jade Polter there, reporting live from KwaZulu-Natal. Now, to our topic of the week. Someone once said, the job of a journalist is not to ask people whether or not it's raining and take both sides. Jade knows it very well. It's to go outside and feel the rain falling on you. But sometimes, even when you do go outside and feel the rain and tell somebody, they still say fake news. So, the importance of facts, it comes into play. It's part of tonight's mission. Climate change. It gives us an opportunity to behave differently on this planet. It's about people actively engaging in their collective future, right? SABC News reporting more than 20 people have died in floods in KwaZulu-Natal alone over the past 2 months. The sorrow continues for this province. The Provincial Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, MEC, has welcomed the National Disaster Management Centre's declaration of a state of disaster for KwaZulu-Natal, following the inclement weather events that afflicted the province from the 16th to the 28th of February. No doubt, devastating. Estimate damages, 3.1 billion rand. Question, to what extent is climate change making extreme weather events such as floods more likely and more severe? That's why I posed the question to Jade. I just wanted to get a sense of whether this had a part in this accident that she's been reporting on. Also, a couple of what haves and what are. What have we learned from these weather-related national or natural disasters? What are the factors that compounds such disasters? What are the shortcomings in terms of disaster response from the local authorities? It brings us to our umbrella question of the week, and we ask you, what steps should be taken to make South Africa more flood resilient? Let us know at SABC_TV. It's about impact, adaptation, vulnerability, and sustainability. Let us know your thoughts at SABC News_TV Perspective. Coming up. All right, I want to tee up the discussion for you, what we know and why it matters. G20 on the lips of many, right? South Africa is holding the presidency, and there are a number of meetings being held this year. One that is relevant to tonight's topic is the G20 Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group. Now, the aim is to integrate risk reduction measures into public and private sector investment decisions, as well as policy making. Why? Well, it's obviously to reduce existing risks, prevent the creation of new risks, but ultimately build, and this talks to our topic, resilient economies, societies, as well as natural systems. The big question is how. Let's show you the various provinces that were impacted by flooding. Control, you can put up that slide. Just gives you a sense of what we're talking about. KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, the Eastern and Northern Cape, Mpumalanga and Limpopo. And as I mentioned earlier, state of disaster declared in KwaZulu-Natal. Ordinarily, this declaration represents a critical intervention to ensure a cohesive as well as a comprehensive response to the devastating consequences of the recent disruptive rain. So there was extensive damage to public infrastructure as well as private property. We've showed you those visuals throughout the week. I want to get further insight now and invite my guest, Lerato Mafulako, transportation engineer and researcher at Wits University. Lerato, good to have you on the program. We need your better mind to understand what we're talking about here. Now, as you can see, flood impact a number of provinces. Let's go to the next slide and give you a sense of the issue of infrastructure as well. Mm-hmm. Building resilience within communities, within road infrastructure. Talk to us about what's the best way to get there?
There are a number of things that we can do to build resilience. I think firstly, we need to be able to adapt our infrastructure to the current climate that we are experiencing in the country. One of the things that we could look at doing is, increasing capacity of our stormwater drainage systems, and as well as, building infrastructure that is ready to experience the impact of the climate, improving our road systems. We need to do a little bit of research about, the impacts that this new climate has on our infrastructure and really, come to understand, how we can better, construct our infrastructure so that we can withstand these disasters.
Urbanization, the increase in the population in cities, in towns. To what extent does this play a part?
I think it does play a big part because, when we build cities, sometimes we don't build them for the populations that, we find in some areas.
Right. But why not? Because the whole purpose of census is to get an understanding of how many people we have in a specific province, right? Mm-hmm. Are you finding that there's a gap there that needs to be plugged?
Yeah, there might be a gap. Urbanization, I think it's happening at a quicker rate than maybe we can estimate it. Mm-hmm. Growth in these urban areas, we started building up. Right. We're no longer building horizontally anymore. Right. So areas that were probably, maybe we thought we were going to build like a couple of houses now are housing maybe 50 people instead of a family of just 3, averaging like 5 households.
Right.
Yeah.
Now the last point on this slide is very topical: overwhelmed drainage systems.
Yeah.
Talk to us about your research and the current drainage systems that we have, and how effective is it in mitigating against floods?
Yeah, so I think this speaks back to the first point that we spoke about, which is climate, which is basically climate change factors, right? When we were designing our infrastructure, we designed it for a specific return period. Right. And because of the rainfall that we're experiencing now, which we didn't expect, we find that some of our infrastructure is inadequate to sustain or withstand the flooding that we are seeing today. Yeah. And that's why we probably see an overwhelm, our drainage systems being overwhelmed. But we can also speak to, littering that's happening in some of these drainage systems, a lack of maintenance that's also happening when it comes to the government as well. So those issues exacerbate our drainage issues. So
the litter, the rubbish that gets into that system is a topical issue that people are citing. Look, the layman is citing that that's possibly the cause. But I wonder, when you talk about maintenance is very key. How often should those systems be checked? And
Yeah.
do we even have the capacity to actually do that?
Yeah. So I think with regards to how often it should be done, that's on every single infrastructure basis, right? So whatever you design that infrastructure for, obviously when you think about maintenance, you think about the cost of maintenance. And if you're going to come up with a maintenance plan, you have to make economic considerations as well. So yeah, basically you'll have a maintenance plan, and you'd have to you'd have to do maintenance based on the planned maintenance. So every infrastructure would have a different maintenance plan. And then with regards to the littering, that's part of maintenance. Our municipalities checking that our drainage systems are still working, making sure that there are no blockages in our drainage systems as well. Yeah.
Important point. I want to talk about adaptation strategies as it relates to climate change, if you can flip it. Climate proofing existing infrastructure. How easy or how hard is that in order to mitigate against deaths, especially in certain provinces?
Yeah. Yes, I'm actually glad that you brought up deaths, because I think when we think about infrastructure damage and we think about infrastructure loss, we think about the economic impacts, but we don't really think about the lives that are lost. And I think these types of situations really bring that home to us. And I think that's when we think about climate proofing, I think that should be at the top of our list, making sure that we don't lose lives. Early warning systems are an example of climate, building our infrastructure for that kind of resilience. But yes, with climate proofing, what that can look like, I can go back to the example of our stormwater drainage systems. Obviously, our flood lines they basically like a moving target, right? We are constantly trying to catch up with, where's the flood going to be in the next couple of years. And essentially, we could adapt our infrastructure to be able to withstand the new rainfalls that we're experiencing.
Okay, Lerato, we're going to take this further in a short while. Lerato Mafulako is a transportation engineer and researcher at Wits University. She's going to stay with us. Thank you for now. We'll come back to you in a short while. Couple of definitions for you. Weather, short-term atmospheric conditions. Climate is the weather of a specific region averaged over a long period. So, how do we know what we are seeing in terms of floods now, and is it due to climate change? We will discuss next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. We're talking about extreme weather, and we wanted to know your take on this. We took to the streets, various streets of Johannesburg, seeking diverse insights and perspectives on this topic, and this is what you had to say. Take a look.
I think the cause of this flooding that we are experiencing today, it is lack of maintenance within our cities or our villages, which is our locations. Because now, if we can check our pitch boards, it's really blocked. Therefore, where is this water going to go?
Both lack of maintenance and climate change, because climate change has been a problem for quite some time now. And then also, there's no maintenance of infrastructure within South Africa. And I think that's one thing that we as the public or the country as a whole, we need to look at. So that we can ensure that the infrastructure is well maintained and everything is done according to the required standards.
I would personally think that mostly the maintenance part of it, because it goes to if you're able to maintain the current infrastructure that we have, you are able to combat the societal issues, which is the climate change that we have no control over.
Putting the blame on the door of the government, because it is their duty to make sure that there's no flooding, and most importantly, most of the pipes on the sides of the road, they cannot accommodate a lot of water.
Yes, it might be a climate change, but honestly, I just feel that it has to do with us taking responsibility to make sure that we keep our country not only clean, but to ensure that everything, it operates in a smooth way.
All right, we appreciate your thoughts on this matter. Let's unpack this issue. Still with me in studio is Lerato. Mafulako is a transportation engineer and research from Wits University. We also have Professor Jasper from the Wits Geography and Environmental Science, as well as Gundo Maswime is a UCT civil engineering lecturer. They are both joining us on Teams. Thank you so much for joining us. Look, Professor Knight, maybe I can start with you with the issue around climate change. And, you know, there are people, as soon as you mention the word climate change, you start yawning and say, oh, same old, blame everything on climate change. So let's start broad and then we'll zoom in. Talk to us about the link between climate change and natural disasters, what we're experiencing now.
Yes, well, thank you. Well, I guess the thing to note, of course, is that climate change isn't going to go away. It's something that is here to stay, and humanity has got to deal with it. And there is a very close link between climate and environmental change and the types of natural phenomena that can potentially give rise to disasters, such as the floods that we have experienced, you know, over the country over recent weeks. And of course, you know, we have a persistent history of lots of floods hitting, in particular, KwaZulu-Natal. And of course, you know, 3 years ago, 435 people died during very serious flood events. Now, what we know with respect to climate and environmental change is that global warming is very simply increasing the amount of heat and energy in the atmosphere. And this is the driving system behind global weather patterns. So what this means is that these weather events, such as cyclones and hurricanes and so on, that we see in all parts of the world, are simply being amplified, so made worse. They are made stronger and more devastating by this added heat and energy within the global climate system. So unfortunately, you know, these are things that we should anticipate becoming more common and potentially in turn more devastating going forward. So,
Gundo, climate change is one part of this equation. The consequences of severe or extreme weather, the handling of that, infrastructure issues, it goes down to cities, municipalities, provinces. How are we doing in terms of that, in terms of infrastructure that is resilient to the effects of climate change?
Thank you. Let's look at KZN or Durban to be specific, because we have had at least 500 people dying of after the floods since the Quarry Road disaster of 2022. What is different about Durban is that Durban sits on a soil formation called Barrier Red. It's not a special sand different from any other normal sand. The problem is the ridges that it forms. If you know the bluff, it's very elevated. Even the place called Barrier, it's actually called Barrier after that soil. So the geology of the area has been studied since the 1930s. There is a lot of maps produced on where people must not be staying. Unfortunately, at the time, way back then, it was the richest people that lived there, and they didn't want that information to go out and devalue their properties. So the geology of the area has been studied. The shale formations of the Pietermaritzburg group that are dipping towards Durban, coming from Pietermaritzburg. So what normally happens with when there is a flood, when these soils get saturated, the barrier red sand moves as a mechanism because it liquefies. So you cannot build a house to resist a mudslide. It's not possible. So you have to do it by zoning. And we know where the zoning needs to be done. We know how the shale formations from Pietermaritzburg supergroup behave. Because with them, most of they're actually layers, and you know water is incompressible. So when water goes into the layers, then one layer will just slide over the other one, and then so we know the geology of the area well. Early warning systems worked quite a bit. They are working closely with the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and they have got some early warning systems in place. But we know what will happen where What we don't know is when it will happen.
So how that type of soil, how ubiquitous is it in terms of South Africa as a country in general?
It's mostly in KZN.
Yeah.
In Gauteng, in this city center, we have soil that behaves similar to barrier red sand, but the difference is that Johannesburg does not have those elevated hills of the same soil.
Right.
So Johannesburg is fairly flat in that sense, but the Brixton red soil is not that much different from barrier red. The only difference is once the slopes are too high, it becomes difficult to prevent the soil sliding when it gets saturated, and sometimes when water goes inside in the soil. So Johannesburg would be more a concern for if we're talking about dolomite and not so much the flooding.
Right. Professor Knight, I mean, a mass movement of people away from such areas might be impractical. What are scientists saying? How do we get ahead of this? What's the possible solutions?
Yes, well, there are a number of things that we can do here. The first, of course, is use the outputs from global and regional climate models in order to derive a better understanding about the likely trajectory of climate and environmental change across the country. So what these climate models suggest is that there's actually going to be increasing uncertainty and increasing variability of hot and cold and wet and dry periods and events in different parts of the country.
Right.
And here we can not just anticipate an increasing frequency of cyclones coming in from the warm Indian Ocean and bringing rise to lots of rainfall, but here, of course, we may have other issues at play as well. So here, of course, where we have heavy rain upon the land surface, as has been described, we're going to get a loss of mass strength within that material, and we're going to get mass movements and landslides and similar things taking place. So here it isn't just understanding the climate as a forcing factor.
Yes.
We also then have to consider what happens next. And here, therefore, we need an integrated understanding of the relationship between weather and climate variability and how that impacts upon the land surface.
Yeah.
And one key element that confounds our understanding of this relationship is, of course, human activity. So here we change the nature of the natural land surface by urbanization, by agriculture, by inappropriate development, by poor infrastructure planning, and so on. So here we need a sort of a geotechnical understanding that can better inform on how we can make the land surface more resilient to climate and environmental events in the future. And in turn, if we have a resilient land surface and infrastructure, then we are likely to lead to lower impacts.
Right. In terms of impact, Lerato, and these are issues we're experiencing now. You know, it's no longer your children's children's children. You know, we're feeling the effects now. You often see in these videos that do its rounds on social media that cars turn into yachts in certain parts. Talk to us about design, the materials we use in terms of building roads, etc. Is there a smarter way of going about this?
Yes, of course. So every road is built different depending on the region that it is in. You know, in the southeastern end of our country or southeastern region of our country, that's where we find that we've got a lot of rainfall, and that's where we should worry about things like these types of disasters, flooding, and water issues in our pavements. Whereas when you go to the north western end of our region of our country, that's more drier areas where you know, our roads, we don't really design them to withstand too much water damage. So obviously the materials will be different depending on what region you're in. And there's other factors that come into play, what materials are available in those regions as well. But obviously, you know, the road has to meet, you know, design standards as well.
Talk to us about design standards and what are we learning from other countries that have similar climate or similar issues that we do? Is there any material out there that we can procure that absorbs better? I'm talking in layman's terms, obviously,
Okay.
but your better mind can help us source this out. What are you learning in terms of your research?
Okay, so I think it's very difficult to take situations from other countries and bring them into our country, because like Professor Knight has spoken about how our region is very different from other parts of the world. The geology in our country is very different. And remember, when we are building roads, we're using local materials, okay? If you're going to source materials from outside of the country, that's going to be a very costly exercise. So you want to source your materials locally, and you want to, do the best with what you have here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Look, money is a big issue. We'll talk about that in a short while. I want to bring in our digital audience now. Let's talk to Michelle. Talk to us about where are you currently, Michelle, and what is the situation in your community?
Good evening. Thank you so much. So I'm based in Gauteng, and I think that, it obviously isn't as like the consequences aren't as severe as what the people in KZN are experiencing. But I think that it is reflective of a much bigger and deeper issue with regards to why has infrastructure not improved over the time period now where these floods are continuously affecting local communities. So I think it is reflective of a much bigger political problem that needs to be addressed.
Michelle, thank you very much indeed. Makatso, let's hear from you.
Greetings, everyone. I am in the Johannesburg region, and I have to say and agree with Michelle that we're facing a bigger systemic issue here in the failures of governance, particularly because when we look at the local government with only still struggling to reach a compliance or financial compliance of over 40 municipalities annually, that cannot build capacity in any way. And the more technical aspects of this is that we are failing in developing and understanding intelligence at a local level, and the response time is speaking to the kind of failures that we see within the KZN region, the Gauteng region, the Limpopo region, is that we're having very lagged response times to these crises, and we're not developing any capacity beyond that, which is a big systemic problem that we need to deal with.
The criticism is reactive instead of being proactive. Aliswa, your lived experience?
Thank you so much. I am in KZN, and obviously I grew up in Harding, which is also in KZN. The area has not been affected by floods, to my knowledge, but early last year, rather, there was a road that collapsed. And when you really look at it and really think about it, and also in my scientific sort of opinion, that was a rare occurrence. And also it can, in a way, be attributed to the changes in weather and climate that we are seeing in recent times. And in terms of the question that you asked, I think we are lacking in terms of integrating climate change considerations into the planning processes, in terms of the EIA assessments, the application processes, the authorizing of all of these developments that can have really dire consequences when they are not done in the proper way, when the necessary reports are not completed, or they're not adhered to, the recommendations in those reports are not adhered to.
Do you just pull back the curtain for us a bit and give us a sense of what people are talking about in your community, the people, your friends, your peers? Are they taking the issue of climate change seriously?
Oh, yes, definitely. It is something that really worries us a lot because, I mean, as young people now, we're no longer just worried about dying of diseases. Now we're worried about the fact that climate change that used to be a topic of, in future we will be dealing with these issues. It's now a thing of there are floods every day, and studies have shown that the people that are affected the most are school-going children. These are young people who have a whole future, ahead of them, who cannot realize their dreams. These are people in high school whose studies are affected, and by affected I mean that sometimes they miss days at school. These are people who, instead of being worried about achieving their dreams, are now having to face the reality of I might not actually live to that to the age of enjoying my old age. And also the IPCC has also released research that tells us that the people who are going to be affected the most are the young people. We are the ones that are going to be facing the real wrath, and which has already started of climate change and flooding.
Lindani, you get that sense of urgency in your community, the urgency to change things around?
Yeah, of course. I'll start by saying this. I recently moved to Joburg. And to me, it's quite startling to see how in this part of the country and the part where I'm at, people are not really affected by floods as much. Whereas where I was born and raised in KwaZulu-Natal, in informal settlements and townships, this is a big problem. This is a huge problem. Everyone recognizes that weather patterns are changing, that floods are becoming much more frequent. But, because there's that disconnect between climate change experts and grassroots movements, people might not coin terms like climate change or adaptation, but they know what's happening. They know that weather is getting harsher and harsher. And I do want to take the opportunity to change the narrative a bit and focus on the social aspects of what we're seeing. Huge amounts, millions of Black, colored, and people of Indian descent were shifted by the apartheid regime to undesirable plots of land. And because of the economic pressures and the repression we were facing as a people, till this day, the materials that we use to construct our house are not up to par. They cannot handle the force of floods. So we're calling for governments to recognize that, much of what we're experiencing and the people who are affected the most by flood and climate change are Black, poor families. And the government needs to start changing the legacy of the apartheid regime. And it's very disheartening to see that democracy-era policies like the RDP housing program are reinforcing apartheid spatial planning. If you look at RDPs, they're mostly in townships and undesirable areas, and we want this to change.
All right, point taken, Lindani. Thank you very much indeed. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, more discussion. We'll flesh this issue out, especially the message and how it's being interpreted. But the bigger issue is practical solutions. What can be done now in order to effect change? More next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. Let's remind you about our question of the week. And we're asking you, basically, how do we make this country more resilient in terms of flooding, in terms of natural disasters in general? You see what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal. Over 20 people dead. How do we not become numb to the pain? And how do we put purpose to pain? Let's find out from our guest, Gundo. If government came to you and said, Gundo, give us some solutions. They probably have. Tell us, what would you say? Practical solutions to prevent fatalities after a downpour.
Okay. The first is what Lerato touched on when he was talking about adapting the existing infrastructure. When we build our roads, we must build them to become rivers because especially local roads, because we are building them to actually block water and actually become dams instead. So if it's carefully planned, the roads are supposed to be the conduit where water would move, but then they must also be built with a particular slope to ensure that the water does not flow with a velocity that will wash everything on its way away. The second thing is to build attenuation ponds. These are areas where water is collected, and you can use sports fields for that. Dig them a little bit down, and when you zone your towns, your residential areas, make sure that those low points, they become where the sports facilities are, because nobody is going to be playing soccer when it's raining. Right. So, and then the retrofitting of, I think some of our stormwater channels must be feed drains, more open than the closed ones, because it looks like government has a problem with maintaining the closed stormwater drains. And also they need to be designed with a self-cleansing velocity. That means they must have the size and the slope. That when if there is a blockage in the system, it should be able to wash itself aware of. The last thing is with design. There's one formula that people use, which Lerato touched a little bit on. They use the rational method, where there's a formula that they use for the runoff quantity. One of the values there is the rainfall intensity, or what Lerato was calling the return time. What used to happen every 20 years is now happening every 2-3 years. So that is a problem. I would say once you finish designing, when it gives you the size of a pipe that you're going to use, go 1 or 2 sizes up and let's pay a little bit extra. And because that can save lives. So those are just really some of the interventions at design level that we can look into.
Well, Prof. Knight, those are practical examples or practical solutions of what to do. Obviously, we need money. Is the science clear enough to help government or help authorities, whoever's in charge of putting these or implementing these solutions, to pinpoint exact or make it more predictable in order to pinpoint exactly what needs to be done and in what time frame?
Well, the science of climate change is very, very clear, and it's completely unambiguous. And this should give a very strong indication to national governments worldwide about what they need to do. So they need to invest in their countries today to withstand these disastrous events in the future. But of course, that's a political decision. And as we've seen with President Trump, politicians do what they like, irrespective of what the science actually says. And of course, this is a real issue. What we do know, however, is that it does require investment, and in particular for countries like South Africa, where, of course, there is a limited amount of money to go around, there are going to be other priorities as well. But of course, this is where scientific information for both physical and social scientists can really provide very strong guidance to governments in indicating what they can do now to actually make it cheaper in the future. So if we invest now, this will reduce long-term impacts. It will increase the likelihood that we will have better health and well-being in the population. It will increase sustainable development. So basically, everyone's a winner if we invest now. So if we invest now, this will save us money in the long term. But of course, it's making that kind of persuasive arguments to government that's often actually very difficult to do.
How do you make the argument more appealing, Lerato? As a transportation engineer, you heard what Gundo had said in terms of offering some practical solutions. How expensive is it? And how do you convince authorities to pick that, go ahead with that?
So, I mean, firstly, it would be quite expensive, and it is hard to convince, government to spend, money on potentially over engineering infrastructure, essentially. But I think, an argument for this now is that, a rand today is worth more than, a rand tomorrow, and what could be expensive today will be, significantly more expensive in the future, if we talk economics. And I think that's a language that a lot of people understand. If we, start talking money, then it resonates a lot with people. And I think, the lack of political will also, is something to speak on. I think our politicians really need to be put into a room and really made to understand the impact of the loss of life. In our country, we actually, at the moment, we don't have an indicator for, what is a life worth. And I think if we had to monetize, what life is worth, like what does it cost us to lose a life, especially a human being that is active in the economy? What does that cost us, and what are the implications if we don't implement some of these strategies?
Michelle, let's bring in our digital audience. I just want to test sentiment, and because these things are happening more frequently in terms of natural disasters in your community, do people know who to call, what number to dial when they're in trouble given a natural disaster? What's your lived experience in that regard?
As much as the information should be common knowledge, in my opinion, just because of the nature of how many people are affected and the severity of how people are affected, I think that there isn't enough public knowledge and public education on who do you actually call when in trouble, in terms of things like flooding, in terms of how do you get hold of them, what is the process for that. So I do think that there is a gap in public knowledge in terms of emergency contacts and what to do in a situation like this.
Yeah. Lindani?
Yeah, I do want to say that it's the same thing in my community. People generally do not know who to contact. To be honest, even I right now, if a flood were to hit my area, I do not know local law enforcement or rescue services that I should call. And that's very alarming. It's really alarming because it shows that, at this point as a society, we don't realize just how big of a threat this is. Our lives are at stake. It's an existential threat and we need to work on it. And so we urge, the government and other stakeholders, as South Africa is drafting its nationally determined contributions for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, we urge them to dedicate more money and commit themselves to investing in adaptation policies to ensure that we prevent these disasters before they even happen. And the really sad thing is that, we keep complaining about how reactive our government is and doesn't prepare for the future. But even when it comes to reacting, we can see a lot of inefficiencies because, after infrastructure is destroyed, it takes years for it to be fixed. And that's something that as a country, we generally cannot accept.
Right. Professor Knight, you say the science is clear. Maybe the issue lies with messaging. Often in the media, sometimes, I don't know if we at fault as well, but the interpretation of climate change is often gloomy. Does this stifle people's ability to react in a positive way? How is the message coming across?
Well, you're certainly right. I mean, the media play a very big role in communication. But of course, the media is a very quickly shifting field.
Correct.
So here, apart from traditional media, of course, we also have the very quickly moving field of social media. And this is conveying information and disinformation extremely quickly. So here, all of us are being assailed by all of this information that's really difficult to unpick and to understand what's real, what's not real, and so on. So certainly in terms of communication about climate change issues, of course, all of these things are becoming more mainstream. But equally, here we need to ensure that we have a general population that is engaged with these issues, that sees the relevance of these issues, and understands the implications of their decision-making ability and capacity, and how that can, for example, influence government policy, and how that can influence their own local communities. So people may feel disempowered because climate change is a thing that's taking place globally, and what can one little person do to combat this? So it's those kinds of communication issues that sort of really need to be addressed. But equally, of course, it needs a scientifically literate community. So here, that is the role of government, of course, through education, but of course, it's also through community activities and community leaders, and through the media as well. So I think this requires really a multi-pronged approach in order to engage things, or engage people and different communities in different ways with considered and consistent messages.
Right. Professor Knight, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. I just want to pause the conversation now. As you know, on this channel, breaking news comes first. I want to bring in Jade Polser, live for us in Mandeni in KwaZulu-Natal. We've heard reporting of a bus crash, 8 people killed, among them a minor. Jade Polser joins me now live. Jade, what more are we learning?
Well, very good evening to you, Blaine, and rescue personnel and those on the scenes are continuing to try and get to those affected. Blaine, they are seemingly just pulling bodies from the wreckage. We last spoke and I said it was 8 fatalities, 88-seater bus, 80 injured, but with the bodies that they're pulling from the wreckage, we've actually lost count now. Even the rescue personnel on the ground are trying to just tally up all those numbers, the names, and surnames of people, speaking to the friends that were also a part of the church. What we know is that this bus was traveling from Richards Bay, Blaine, all the way to Stanger when the driver of the bus lost control, and you can just see in the Pathology vans on your screens. Very sad, incredibly sad. The lives lost here on the N2. Now, earlier I did say that the N2 was closed. It is now subsequently open, Blaine, as rescue personnel continue their efforts in trying to get to those passengers who are still entrapped under the bus. I'm going to try and speak to some of the churchgoers. Bear with me, Blaine. This is a very difficult story. Many are still very emotional, are distraught, are confused. So let's try and see if we can't speak to them. I'm going to try and just see if we can't speak to these two ladies over here. Ma'am, I'm sorry, we're live on SABC News. I just wanted to ask you, are you a part of the church that...
Same thing for now. Yes, I am in part of the church. I'm not a new one, but I can't say anything now. We're in a trauma.
Understandably so, ma'am. Understandably so. Blaine, many are still very, very traumatized at what happened. I have been speaking to them off camera, and I think let's just give them and afford them that respect. Some have also lost their family members and are really trying to make sense of this all. And I think what has been the most heartbreaking is that every single time they pull up a body which is covered in a white plastic, some of the community have to go and identify. I think we'll stop here just to give them privacy. Some of those churchgoers and family have to go and identify those particular bodies to give these rescue personnel and the law enforcement here on the ground the names of these passengers who unfortunately lost their lives this afternoon.
All right, difficult assignment, Jade. Thank you very much indeed for your reporting. No doubt Jade will keep us up to date with the very latest developments from KwaZulu-Natal. We have to wrap up the show. Thank you very much indeed to my guest, Lerato, Professor Knight, Gundo, digital audience as well. Value added, no doubt. And Professor Knight, I get your point. We need to stay on this. It needs to be a sustained message in order for it to make an impact. So thank you very much indeed for your time. Look, I just want to pull back the curtain a bit. And given what Jade has just said, as reporters, we leave people who are suffering and move on to the next story. It's part of the job. But their stories, their experiences seldom leave our hearts and our minds. So many lives have been lost, directly or indirectly, by the floods. So many people are grieving tonight, including those you just saw now on your screen. You are in our thoughts and prayers. Death can't be abstract. No, it can't. We have to resist the urge of becoming numb to the sorrow every time disaster claims lives. Severe storms, floods, fires. It seems to be becoming more and more intense and unpredictable. But there are other factors that can lead to devastation. The importance of expanding infrastructure, as you heard Gundo talking about, Lerato as well, to make it suitable for the current population. It's been underscored. If not maintained, communities will remain vulnerable to the elements such as flooding. We need to use this pain as a driver to become better and renew our efforts of finding sustainable solutions to this problem. And that's my take. If you miss anything on this program, then be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube, as well as SABC Plus. Trends Travel up next. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.